how are science and theology still in conversation? One way we can explore this is by looking at something that is fundamental to science today, the laws of nature. This is because the very principles defining the laws of nature were conceived on specifically theological grounds. Contemporary philosopher of biology Michael Ruse states that, "I believe the key distinguishing factor about science to be its appeals to and reliance on law, blind, natural regularity. Everything else follows from an unpacking of this notion: explanation, prediction, testing, confirmation, falsifiability, tentativeness." Here, Ruse points out the basic features ascribed to the laws of nature as we see them today, and it's here where we start to see the ties between science and theology. In 2007, physicist Paul Davies released an article entitled, "Yes, the universe looks like a fix, but that doesn't mean that God fixed it," where in a monologue about the laws of nature and theology, he states that the very notion of physical law has its origins in theology. The idea of absolute, universal, perfect, immutable laws comes straight out of monotheism, which was the dominant influence in Europe at the time science as we know it was being formulated by Isaac Newton and his contemporaries. This reference to Newton and his contemporaries has been well documented by historians of science. Newton himself was a devout believer in God and the Bible, and in his most famous work, the Principia, Roger Coates, who wrote the preface, stated that, "From this fountain, the will of God, it is that those laws, which we call the laws of nature, have flowed, in which there appear many traces of the most wise contrivance, but not the least shadow of necessity. These therefore we must not seek from uncertain conjectures, but learn them from observations and experiments." Newton himself, in his introduction to his Principia, stated in relation to the movement of the heavenly bodies that this most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. This became the standard language around the time of the scientific revolution, as the idea of an all-powerful God who created like a mechanic and upheld the universe in a consistent manner through the laws of nature was being developed, in stark contrast to the previously accepted medieval idea in which the universe was more like a living, breathing organism. If the laws of nature were so tied up with the idea of God as creator, what changed? In other words, why is it that today we see the laws of nature as a reason to do away with God? Davies again gives us a nice summary of the present state of things in that same article mentioned earlier. He says that, just as classical Christianity presents God as upholding the natural order from beyond the universe, so physicists envisage their laws as inhabiting an abstract, transcendent realm of perfect mathematical relationships. Furthermore, Christians believe the world depends utterly on God for its existence, while the converse is not the case. Correspondingly, physicists declare that the universe is governed by eternal laws, but the laws remain impervious to events in the universe. This shift from a theistic approach to laws to a much more naturalistic approach can be traced to a specific point in Western history. That point being the mid to late Victorian period. Historians have spent a lot of time working on unpacking what exactly happened during this time, and I'd have to make multiple videos dedicated to this area alone. But for now, what can be said is that 9 influential men formed a group called the X Club in the 1860s, led by the agnostic biologist Thomas Henry Huxley, and together they played a crucial role in catalysing this transition. One historian of Victorian Science has said that they, i.e. the X Club, opposed all suggestions that there were supernatural interventions in the natural order and any attempts to constrain scientific investigation with theologically determined boundaries. There are many other factors involved, of course, such as the French Revolution of the late 18th century and its utilisation of science, amongst other things, as devoid of theology. And within the same century, David Hume, the Edinburgh Enlightenment philosopher, developed his definition of a miracle as a violation of the laws of nature, which for the most part has stuck until today. Moving forward in time, in the early to mid 20th century, a group of academics in Vienna called the logical positivists were hugely influential in arguing in favour of verificationism, a principle that suggested that any sentence that wasn't verifiable by observation or testing, i.e. through scientific means, was meaningless, Therefore, questions about God and morality were meaningless, although not necessarily false. Events such as these, and many more, have helped to dramatically shape the current conception of the laws of nature, at least here in the Western world. However, despite all of this, the fundamental link between the laws of nature and God have not been done away with so much as shoved under a rug. In fact, a number of prominent philosophers today are actively arguing that we need to get rid of the concept of laws of nature altogether, because laws too readily invite the possibility of God talk. Just to name one example, the Durham University philosopher of science Nancy Cartwright in a paper argues that in the concept of law, there is a little too much God. In the end, the concept of a law does not make sense without the supposition of a lawgiver. Her point is clear enough. God, and therefore theology, is inextricably linked with the laws of nature, and so something has to change. So, what this means for science and theology is that, rather than being involved in inherent conflict, there is much space for dialogue. And in fact, we find just that with many academics today who have their degrees in both science and theology. Take for example, Mark Harris, David Wilkinson, and Alistair McGrath. Academics in large have dropped the idea that science is completely separate from religion and theology, and instead you find that historians, sociologists, and many other scholarly fields seek to actively and objectively unpack the relationship between science and theology in all its sheer complexity. So how are science and theology still in conversation? Well, this would be through one of the most fundamental scientific principles, the laws of nature, which also happen to historically be the fundamental theological principles underpinning God's relationship to the world as the natural sciences developed during the time of the scientific revolution. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video on the laws of nature in science and theology. Please like and subscribe, and I'll be back with more videos soon.